Hello, I'm Shadan Larki from Awards Buzz. Thrilled to be joined by Oscar nominee Erik Winquist. Erik, welcome.
Thanks, Shadan. Nice to be here.
Congratulations. So, Oscar nomination number two for you, back 10 years after your previous nomination for, was it Dawn of the Planet?
One.
Yeah.
Yeah, that,
So,
that that one there, right? Yeah,
I love how you have your
the
team
Wall of Apes.
behind you. Yeah, your wall of support there. Um, I was so fascinated looking through your work because you have worked on so many sort of iconic films that have led us to this moment in performance capture and motion capture. I mean, you did Peter Jackson's oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the um
Lord of the Rings.
well, you did Lord of the Rings, you did The Hobbit, and then you also did King Kong with Peter Jackson as well. You worked on the first Avatar film. So you've had a hand in a lot of these sort of iconic films that have brought us here. And of course, you've worked on now all four of the Apes films. What can you tell me about what you've seen just as an artist, as a fan of the evolution of this technology and sort of how we got here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the going way back. I mean, Weta was. I mean, I wasn't involved in the mocap or performance capture side of things on a lot of those earlier films, but I mean, Weta has been using some version of motion capture going all the way back to the Rings films. A lot of that was all the feeding into, say, the massive, all the big armies and the horse capture and everything else. And then that obviously has progressed. I mean, when we think about what we were doing on King Kong with Andy Serkis there, that was, the technology required the team to literally glue markers to his face. And he had to sit relatively still, surrounded by cameras to do his performance work. And through, say, the Avatar, the first Avatar movie was the big sort of jump in performance capture in terms of what the fidelity and the number of performers and their ability to move freely about the space. But that was all in the confines of a very kind of controlled motion capture stage, very purpose-built, specific, well, highly calibrated kind of stage environment. And then when we got to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, there was this idea that why couldn't we do this outside? And so that was the first the big breakthrough that enabled kind of where we are today was taking that performance capture idea from that Avatar film and bringing it outside and capturing in the sunlight and things because the sunlight was a really challenging aspect to overcome. And of course, like through the subsequent films, the Apes films and other projects that we've been involved with on the performance capture side, it was all about making the hardware more robust, allowing us to go out in the rain and deal with like really heavy stunt work without damaging the equipment and still getting the capture of those performances. Fast forward to where we are today. I mean, essentially, the funny thing is we sort of have we're in this interesting cycle where there's an Avatar film that develops a lot of this technology, and then an Apes movie comes along on its heels and takes it outside. And so the same thing now, fast forward 10 years, we had Avatar Way of Water the other year. Same deal. There were years and years of R&D sort of improving the actual performance capture technology. And then now we've got another Apes film that's taken that back outside again, this time into Australia. So instead of having to contend with freezing rain and all of the shooting in rainforests and things, this was all about dealing with the temperature extremes of an Australian summer, dealing with all of the sort of weather and elemental aspects of the capture there, but also with Kingdom. A big part of it too was being able to be a bit more nimble in our sort of setups, and so we could follow the filmmakers into more remote areas and actually get those performances captured, whether our characters are running down a river, whether they were kind of just off in a corner of a location where it would have taken, potentially a day or so, or a day or more to even set up a really robust capture for just a really brief scene. And so that was kind of I think one of the big sort of aspects was just allowing us to sort of really let the filmmakers go wherever they want to go in the environment and shoot their film to whatever gives us the best environment for our performers and for the film, because it's kind of one of the big I guess aspects of these Planet of the Apes movies. I mean, like these aren't animated films. These are very like live action movies that we're putting digital characters into, and so it's all about finding beautiful locations that offer some sort of vision of a future planet Earth, that allow us to sort of tell those kind of stories. So that's kind of I guess the evolution maybe of where we are today.
Yeah, and speaking of the evolution, I mean, where do you think it's gonna go? I read an interview with you where you talked about making things even easier on the actors, making these elements even smaller, so it's easier to take them into sort of these outdoor environments. But also, is there an area where you think could continue to be improved, something that you would like to see, just as somebody who's so passionate about this art
Oh,
form?
I think, yeah, I think the continuing sort of trend of making getting it to a point where we can, reduce the footprint even more and just keep making the setup, making it easier on our performers. We get to a point, ideally, where we don't need to put dots on their faces, for example. But the thing was, we've got to do that in a way where we are confident that we can go into any lighting scenario that the filmmakers may conjure up, and not compromise the actual capture. And so that's potentially some of the avenues where things might head in the future, and just making sure that we can get all of the performance that they're giving us, because that's what makes these films work so well, is just harnessing amazing performances from really talented actors.
And Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes takes place 300 years after the last one, so there is sort of an evolution that happens within the film and the design of the characters. And so, talk to me about that, and how did you show that passage of time through the
Yeah.
VFX?
Well, it was one of the really interesting things about the script for this one, because I think much like Wes was at first, I was a little bit sort of curious or hesitant about where was this going to go, because if it was just going to be a tack on to the end of the previous film, following the same characters, wouldn't maybe have been as interesting. But the fact that Wes had pitched this idea of like, let's catapult ourselves, many generations past the end of that, where now the story of Caesar is like myth and legend. That opens up all sorts of interesting possibilities from the world building side of things, because now we have to conjure up, what does human civilization look like hundreds of years after everybody stops maintaining the infrastructure and doing the gardening and all those kind of things, like really just letting nature completely consume our cities and our infrastructure. And then the other side of it is just we need to form a bridge at this point between the Caesar story, which was kind of, close to where we are now in time, originally starting, of course, with just regular chimpanzees in the wild, to I can't remember how much time had passed. Like, let's call it over 1,000 years, into the future, where the Charlton Heston films from 1968, let's say, picks up, where we've got this bridge essentially between those two parts of the franchise, that we can kind of find a place within. And so, if you think about the proportions of apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, their limbs are very different to ours, much longer arms and much shorter legs. And when we look at the 1968 film, you just had actors, human actors in costumes. And so, looking at where we could maybe find a place in between those two extremes, it opened up things to adjust subtly the length of our characters' limbs to get them closer to the actors that play them. Because one thing we had found on previous installments is, as soon as you put a gorilla on a horse, it starts to look absolutely ridiculous, because these stumpy little legs and all of this mass up top. We knew we had a lot of horse riding to do in this story. And so, for that reason alone, but also just to generally kind of start telegraphing where we are in the timeline of things, we sort of altered the sort of proportions of our ape characters. The other side of things was just the design of them as well. And so, we're sort of in a transitional period, I guess, between, again, the Caesar films and the sort of Planet of the Apes 1968. And so, where can we find, from a character design standpoint, maybe that's sort of somewhere in between those places. But with all of it comes this desire to try and incorporate as much as we can of whoever the actor is that's playing that character into the character design that they're playing. And we did a lot of that with, say, Owen Teague, and looking specifically at some of the very specific expressions that we would see him making, and also looking at things like the asymmetry in his face and incorporating that into Noah's eyes, for example. And as soon as we did that, you really started to see Owen coming through in those performances, and it was quite remarkable.
I want to come back to that, but you said something that piqued my interest, Eric, which is that given that this is your fourth film, how did the other three, just in terms of lessons that you may have learned, how does that inform maybe the decisions that you made here, where you went, oh, this worked really well, let's use this, maybe not use X, Y, and Z? which is crazy because all four films have been Oscar nominated. But I mean, like, inevitably, when you're sort of continuing to hone your craft, like, there are things along the way that you are able to glean.
Yeah. One thing that was I guess, a interesting twist in this one, or a slightly different change of aesthetic, maybe, is the the last two films, Matt Reeves' films, had I think he was very much into the sort of 1970s cinema, controlled camera, slow, creepy zooms, and that kind of a cinematic language. And in this movie, Wes and his DP, Gyula Parosh, wanted to um, keep things more loose and handheld feeling, and almost the camera was freer to move about in times. We were also using anamorphic lenses on this one, which was a first for the recent franchise. We're kind of getting back to more, the kind of cinematic language of the 1968 film, and incorporating that. And so one thing I guess that really helped the process for everybody involved is because we're coming into this with the knowledge and experience of having done the previous three. It gave me an opportunity to pull clips from all three of those films of the befores and afters, basically, of like the process that we went through and what we shot and why we did it the way we did it. And I could actually make a presentation for all of our heads of departments during prep when we were prepping this film before we started shooting, to show them and to show our cast and to really get everybody, I guess, calibrated in terms of what the process of making a movie like this is like, and so that everybody really kind of innately understands why we're doing things the way we're doing and what the benefits are and why we chose to make those choices. Or, if we found instances where, oh, we wish we would have done it a different way, that was sort of fed into the process of, well, for this kind of a shot, maybe we don't need to do a clean plate, and that kind of thing, because that's part of I think the clean plate process. You probably have heard Wes maybe rant a little bit about having to make the movie twice, so to speak, because the way we tend to make these films is, if you think about the logistics of it, we've got actors in gray suits with booms sticking off their face. So every time they turn their head, they've got this thing sticking out from their silhouette, and their characters are different shape than they are. And so, in order to put their digital character into those frames, we need to remove them first, which is really painstaking work to do, especially in the kind of environments that we shot this movie in, where we've got, wind in the bushes, all this kind of like delicate foliage that has to be reconstructed, basically. And so to make the film, to be able to finish the movie on schedule and on budget, we always, once Wes had his take that he was happy with, we would ask the ape actors to step out, and we would try and recreate that same take with all of its intricate sort of, organic handheld steady cam or whatever it may be, camera movement. And in times when it's like, if we had, say, a human actor in there, like Freya Allen playing May, she would have to try and reproduce her performance again, this time without anybody in the scene to play against. And she was absolutely brilliant at mimicking the physicality of getting, like, let's say, pulled by the wrist by a gorilla down a hallway or something like that. Like, I couldn't believe it. She was amazing, physically in doing that. But it's always really hard for, obviously, for actors to really give that same kind of performance when there's nobody there to play off or to look at or to react against. And so, there were opportunities in this film where we definitely, long takes. That was the other thing with the way that Wes and Eula were making this, is they tended towards long performance takes, single shots that would take us through half a scene, let's say. And for that reason, it starts becoming really daunting if you want to, like, imagine yourself as a camera operator trying to reproduce all of the beats that you did when there's nobody to frame on anymore. And so, I think that was one aspect where we definitely had scenes in Kingdom where we just told Wes, like, don't worry about it. We'll bite the bullet on this one, and we're not going to be able to match this in clean plate. So, um, go nuts. And those were the kind of cases where it was much more like a normal movie, where he would get the take he would like, and we'd move on. But yeah, like, all sorts of lessons that we learned from those previous films that we incorporated to this.
You know, and I say this all the time. One thing that fascinates me about VFX in particular is that when you're really good at your job, people don't really notice it or don't really understand the scope of it, right? And especially in this one, because there's, as you mentioned, you do have to create a whole new world, and there's so many new characters. The apes are talking much more in this film. I just want to make sure that our viewers like get a good idea of the magnitude of work that you had to do. And I should mention this was a years long process. You were involved from the very, very beginning. So can you sort of take me into that a little bit more?
Yeah, the dialogue, the speech aspect of this story was very at the fore when we were planning and prepping and trying to figure out how we were going to tackle this work because there's more spoken dialogue. Again, you mentioned, we've got 12 brand new characters here, where in the previous trilogy, we built Caesar and Maurice and Rocket and all of those characters, and then as the films progress, we can make upgrades to them along the way. But here we had to start from scratch and build 12 brand new characters that all had to stand up to like hero close-up level of detail. And also all of our characters were speaking roles in this movie where there's more spoken dialogue here than there had been in the previous trilogy combined. And the facial animation approach we've been using, which has been absolutely working brilliantly, like we've got some of the best facial animators in the business working at Weta FX. And the previous Apes films, we were taking the facial reference of the actors and essentially using that as literal reference and hand keyframing the facial animation on the characters, and it worked fantastically. But because there was so much spoken dialogue and all that, we needed to kind of find a more efficient approach because we didn't want to balloon the size of the team, and that was going to balloon the budget and slow us down. And so we took a facial deep learning solver that we'd kind of used a few projects back and had sort of essentially given it some upgrades. This is the first time we're using our facial deep learning solver on ape characters, and which is a big deal because it's the unlike a humanoid character. If you think like the Will Smith's character from Gemini Man or Josh Brolin playing Thanos in the Avengers films, those are humanoid faces basically, and the topology of an ape face is obviously very different. You look at an orangutan versus Peter Macon, who plays him in this movie, and they couldn't be more different practically. Like they've got very, very different faces, and so when Peter would do this, we couldn't just let it be a one-to-one mapping. And so there's this process that we would essentially, the animators would have to train the brain, so to speak, of this neural network that would learn when the markers on the actor's face did one thing, that meant that the character's face would do this. And the specific mappings of all the facial muscles that we use to drive the digital character's performances, the combinations of those muscles and the activations that are used essentially to make the face shapes that we see on our characters, that is a very nuanced a relationship between the actor and the character. And so the thing that was great about the leveraging a deep learning sort of process in this is that it basically especially the longer that we went through the film, the better and better, more accurate it got because we could feed it more information and animators could adjust and make tweaks along the way. And so the next time it encountered the same kind of movement, we already had that sort of in the bag. And that basically meant that the facial animators, they were starting from a baseline performance that they could then make adjustments to and tweak and spend all of their time um, essentially massaging and finessing the nuance of the facial, all the really like fine, subtle, like facial tics and movements that we see in our actors. Spend all their time focusing on that stuff and making sure that the emotional read that we see when we watch the actor's performance, like we can look at the ape and go, "Am I getting that same sense of pathos, anxiety, exuberance, whatever it may be in that moment? Am I seeing that? Am I getting that emotional hit from the ape actor and or the ape character? And if not, then we need to sort of talk about why that is and what changes we need to make. But anyway, basically it allowed us to deal with a much greater volume of facial performance in this film with a similarly sized team and with actually 2 weeks less in our schedule than we had on the previous film. So big boon for the fidelity of the facial performance in this movie.
Well, Eric, I have to tell you, as a huge Oscar nerd, I hope we get to the point where these performances will be recognized and honored in some way. I think it's really a shame that we haven't thus far. But I have to ask you, did you wake up and watch the announcements? Did you make a day? How did you celebrate this achievement for yourself?
Well, the announcements were made at 2:30 in the morning in New Zealand, and so I think my wife had set an alarm, and she checked it. I just went, and I rolled over and went back to sleep. But yeah, we had a little celebration when I actually properly woke up in the morning. It's just so fantastic to be recognized. Like the nomination is huge for all of us. There are four names on the ticket for this film, but obviously we represent, three from Weta, and that's like three 1,000ths of the total team that sort of put their heart and souls into this for over a year. So it's a massive nod from our peers in the industry, and it's hugely humbling to kind of be recognized as part of that.
Um, Before I let you go, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to touch on? I want to make sure you have the final word here.
Uh, no, I mean I'm really excited to see where things go, and I'm also like really pleased to see that we've got a great ape versus ape battle going on this year between us and Betterment.
Yeah,
There's our colleagues, our colleagues down the hall. Basically, we were working on those two shows concurrently. So there's interesting to see where things are going to go.
that's awesome. Well, I'm rooting for you, and I guess one I'll cheat. Is there another Apes movie perhaps in the works that you know about or could tell me about? If there is, would you want to come back?
We know that 20th Century would love to see more of them, and I'm sure there's something in the works, but I don't know anything about the specifics of anything or whens and the wheres. Obviously, we would be totally keen to jump on board again, especially if it's West Ball.
Mm. All right. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate it, and congratulations. And yeah, I'll be rooting for you in March.
Thanks again, Shadan.